So I've been playing a ton of the Monster Hunter Wilds beta, and my overall conclusion so far is that it's excellent. That might come as a surprise for people who are familiar with my channel, because I have said before that I was very skeptical about Wilds. My biggest fear with it was that it was just going to be World 2, and that it would ignore a lot of the gameplay improvements and systems introduced in games like Generations Ultimate and Monster Hunter Rise, which are done by the other Monster Hunter team. There's two teams. I don't like the idea that one's an A team and a B team, and Wilds helps prove my point there as well, because this game has taken a lot of lessons from Generations Ultimate and Rise, and I think that overall the gameplay feels a lot closer to Rise than it does World, and that to me is a huge positive. It is the one thing I was afraid of the most. It didn't happen. Now, that's not to say I don't like World. I love World. I wouldn't have 600 hours in it if I didn't, but I think the easiest way to explain some of the differences with World and the other two games that live alongside it is that World traded in some of the complexity and depth of the gameplay systems and mechanics and the choices that you have with your weapons, not choosing a weapon, but within each weapon, in exchange for the graphics, the immersion, the atmosphere, which I know is very valuable to a lot of people, but I wanted the best of both worlds, and if I had to choose one of those, I prefer the gameplay. But Wilds so far to me is the best of both worlds. It's not as crazy or as flexible with things like the switch skills allowing you to customize your moveset for each weapon that Rise has, but it is a much faster game in which they have refined so many parts of Monster Hunter that it just feels incredible to play, and a lot of the systems and structure of the game overall have been moved in a new direction that I think benefits the gameplay loop. And I'm going to talk about that. So hi, I'm Mug. If you're new here, welcome. And if you're not new here, welcome back. If you enjoy this video, remember to hit the like button because that helps the video reach farther, helps the channel grow. Greatly appreciated. Let's talk about Monster Hunter Wilds. As an overview, I want to start with performance really quick. I've seen some people complain about PC performance. I've been very lucky. I haven't had those issues. It's also a beta, so hopefully a lot of these things will be fixed. I laughed a lot checking the Monster Hunter Reddit with the people with the polygon graphics. That was really funny. Unfortunate, of course, but still funny. Luckily for me, the game has been running perfect. I've been playing it at 1440p, 21:9 as you can see. Capcom games always do this where it's supposed to be ultra wide, but they have these two little bars on the side, so I zoomed it just a little bit in. I think the game looks incredible, feels incredible to play, and even just having this zone and only 4 monsters, I think it's one of the most beautiful games I've ever seen, not because of the graphics, which are good, but because of the art direction. I don't think I've ever been in a virtual environment where I felt warmth from the sun. Like the way that the environment looks when the sun is shining really strong feels very real. This is a game that I think benefits a lot from HDR. I've seen a lot of people say they don't like HDR and HDR looks very bad or something. I couldn't disagree more, by the way. I think this game, from those details like colors, looks incredible. I really enjoy the animations this time around. They look very good, just moving around, feels and looks great. And I love the soundtrack so far. It sets an amazing atmosphere that just running through these areas, just having your map open and having the backdrops there as you're running to the next hunt, absolutely knocked it out of the park so far. I really like the changes to the structure here. I think they're really important. The idea that the village isn't a sectioned off area and it's just a place. It really helps in creating something that, while it's not an open world game, feels much more organic and helps in what World wanted, which is to make an experience that is very immersive. And they very smartly combined the mounts from Rise into that, because the Sacred does work identical to the Palamuts from Rise. Even during combat, they basically work the same. As far as I'm aware, the Sacred don't have their own skills in the same way that Palicos do, which Palamuts did, but the idea that at any moment during a fight, you can jump on your Sacred, you can sharpen your weapon, you can drink potions from the safety of running around at a very high speed, that's all there, and it contributes greatly to the increased pace of the entire game, just as much as using them for jumping attacks or for now the dismount attacks. but in the navigation aspect as well. Being in camp and just jumping on your mount and running out of camp and starting a hunt from your map, just looking at this very, very nice looking 3D map and looking around, taking in all of the information, saying, oh, I want to hunt this, and just clicking on it and being like, hey, let's do that. And having the game started up is great. Being able to cancel, to change, to access SOS from anywhere you are while in the open world is a game changer for the overall pacing of the game, just the same as having 2 weapons to switch between while on a hunt. It opens up a whole list of possibilities of what you can do both in group hunts and in solo hunts in order to better cover all different options. So if you really wanted to have the ability to knock out a monster and then quickly switch to a severing weapon in order to cut their tail off, before you needed to use a weapon that had both of those things, like the sword and shield, and they would not excel at either compared to weapons that are exclusively for that. Now it's completely viable for you to knock out a monster, jump on your sacred, switch weapons, and jump off and start hacking and slashing at them. So the structure is great, the environment that we have is great, the weather effects in that environment and how they affect fights is interesting, it is dynamic, it makes the fights feel a lot more cinematic. Again, that same objective from World of being immersive is here. So it's carrying over the things that people really like from World. The way that the monsters move and act and the turf wars and all of that. The way that you can use the environment to interact with them, feeling very organic and very cinematic again. It's like, it leads to these very epic moments. But when it comes to the gameplay, and I have played World and Rise in the last month, I do jump into those games from time to time. They're a bit of my therapy comfort games. To me, this feels much, much closer to Rise than it does World. The game feels overall a lot faster. The power level of the hunters overall has increased, and I'm expecting the power level of the monsters to do so as well, because one of my few complaints with this beta is that I think it's very easy at the moment. But the overall speed, I haven't sat down and compared 2 clips at the same time, but I have played Rise and Wilds very close back to back. It's like just a tiny bit slower than Rise. Just the tiniest bit, which I thought they were going to go more for a middle ground. That is not the case. If World is a 0 and Rise is a 10, I feel like Wilds is at an 8 or a 9. It is a very fast game. So a lot of the philosophy from that side of the team is here, and that makes me very happy because I really enjoy how this plays. I would have enjoyed it anyways if it played on the slower side like World, because it's Monster Hunter and I love this series so damn much, but I'm much happier that it's on the side that I prefer, of that speedier gameplay that I think is much more rewarding. I played with all of the weapons, but I only really dove deep into about 7 of them, to the point that I hunted the Ray Dow with each of those 7 weapons, experimented with them to try and really see the changes. And while I'm not going to break down every single weapon and my opinions of them, I overall really like the changes. And I want to preface my comments with the weapons by saying that there's about 7 weapons I would say that I'm very confident with, that I have at least over 50 to 60 hours on each of them, and then I have my mains on which I probably have hundreds of hours. And there's some weapons I have no real clue about, something like the greatsword, that's not my territory. So I'm going to limit myself to talk more about the ones I know in and out a lot more and their evolution and history of. But I'm not some all-weapons master. I don't know every single move for every weapon and every single name for them and their motion values throughout the last 5 entries. As somebody who has used a lot of bow and a lot of insect glaive, I feel that the bow is wonderful in this game, and that people who have not liked the bow before are going to really enjoy it. But I also want to talk about it because it shows how much thought has been put into each of these weapons, and updating them and changing them and just refining their overall flow. Making the bow into a resource weapon, a weapon that has a bar that you then choose how to spend that bar on different abilities, is a really smart choice. Because to me, the changes made to the bow come from a place of understanding that bow mains reach a point where the stamina management and the basic combo and positioning becomes second nature to us, and the only thing that we are really considering during a hunt is not screwing up with our optimal dodges and positioning. which is a lot. It's never boring to play bow, even when you get the whole flow of it down. But the way to make bow more interesting was to give it choices on what you should do at any given time, while shaking up the core loop of what you're supposed to do. So now the bow is the double bar management weapon, where you have to constantly manage your stamina for your optimal combos, as well as your resource bar. And whether you want to use it to apply coatings, that thank God they're no longer ammos that you bring on, they're a power-up that you use with the bar, or the tracker arrow that leads to some very interesting combos. So there's a lot more divisions in the path of what you do at any given moment with the bow, depending on what's happening, and it's incredibly fun. I am very happy with these changes, and the details of how you recover stamina a bit when you load a tracker arrow. The fact that the arc shot is an opportunity to also recover stamina in the middle of a combo and can go into a full charge. These are things that are very clearly done by a team that I know this should be obvious, but we see the opposite all the time. This team knows exactly what to do to make these weapons flow and feel great in the hands of their players. Which is very funny because I really don't like the Insect Glaive. The new move is really fun, but I think it's the worst weapon in the game right now. The Kinsect moves incredibly slowly, and maybe that's something that upgrades through progression, but right now it's insufferable. And also Aerial Insect Glaive is just completely gone, the same as Aerial Dual Blades, another one of my mains, is gone. I really like some of the changes to the dual blades. Many of them come directly from Rise. Like for example, the new powered up state you get for a perfect dodge that has you dealing damage through every dodge. That is just one of the switch skills from Rise, and now it's put into a power-up. The idea of switching between Archdemon and Demon mode through combos is also something that was more or less incorporated in Rise. So overall, it flows really well, and it's still very fun to use. Again, very smart decisions, taking certain things from Rise while leaving others behind. I think the bowguns, which I've used a lot over the years, I got into bowguns for a bit and just learned to do the whole very, very nerdy thing of like crafting ammo as you go during a hunt and stuff like that. I really like the follow-up shot and the energy mode. Both of them are really interesting in how they interact with each other, and they make the weapons flow really well, but a lot of those weapons and their potential is really going to be seen later on. I think the bowguns specifically are the weapon types that change the most over the course of the game, because the different levels on each of the ammos they use and the impact that skills can have on them can dramatically change how those weapons work. So I'm really curious to see how the mechanics we see here are going to interact in the late game. And I think that most of the weapons have just seen buffs. I like the version of the sword and shield that is here. It's very close to the one that was in Rise, and I enjoy it a lot. I think the sword and shield in Rise was super fun. Surprisingly, the weapon that I found myself gravitating the most towards has been the Gunlance. Absolutely destructive and super satisfying, and just flows in a way that I feel like it didn't flow before. It feels a lot faster, a lot more mobile, and like I can get to the things I want to do faster and better. It just clicked for me playing this beta when it's never clicked before. I might have like 10 hours in Gunlance in my life, and I think that 3 of them are now from this beta. But overall, just really smart. I think the heavy bowgun is lagging behind. I think the Insect Glaive is lagging behind because the heavy bowgun just doesn't have as much nuance to its usage. But as per usual with the heavy bowgun, depending on the ammo and how you kit out a specific thing to take down a monster, it might be the strongest weapon in the game. In the late game, it tends to be the case that it's in the top always. But your usual suspects for best weapons and most fun weapons are there. The longsword has even more solidified its identity here as the counter weapon, which is really good for the people who enjoy that. I've heard really good things about Greatsword, a weapon that I've never touched and never intend on touching. The hammer is actually one of the weapons I feel is just a straight up upgrade from Rise, where it got a lot of quality of life help and a lot of different customization towards mobility in Rise thanks to the switch skills. Here it just feels crazy. You can just go from a charge to pretty much any combo route you want in any situation. It's super strong, and I expect it to be a ton of fun. It's also super satisfying as it always is and as it always should be. I also think that overall focus mode and the attacks for exploiting wounds is a great idea. A lot of the stuff from Rise has been incorporated into that, along with some other changes. For many weapons, focus mode is incredibly valuable in keeping track of monsters and kind of better aiming certain moves. I noticed that a lot on Gunlance when shielding and getting into my combos and correctly aiming my mobility. But I do worry a bit about how it's going to interact in hunts. I'm sure that at some point it doesn't matter. We're playing online, we're just having fun, we're hunting the monster. Whoever can hit the weak point will. But that is definitely an area where certain weapons like the bow guns, the bow, the insect glaive have a much bigger advantage versus others. And I also know that there's stuff like the charge blade. One of the easier ways, of the very few that there are, to get into the spinning axe mode is through that attack. And I start to think about, well, is there going to be a strategy here of like making sure you leave certain things there so certain weapons that gain more benefit from them can use them versus just using them? There's some strategy there. I wonder how that's going to pan out, but I do overall like the mechanic, especially focus mode and the wounds. We'll see later on how they end up evolving. So honestly, in just this beta, they have calmed every worry I could have had about the direction of Wilds, and I am super happy with it. The only complaints I can give to what is here right now is that I think that monsters tend to run away a bit too much. That leads to a lot of like dead air chasing them down to the next location. In Rise, a lot of the monsters would just disappear and reappear somewhere else, like at impossible speeds. But here, following that world style, you see them and they move at their own speed towards the next location, and you either interrupt that somehow, or you just have to kind of lag behind them on the way, and it feels worse than in Rise, where the monsters would disappear and it's kind of up to you. You're left there like, well, now I'm going to sharpen, or I'm going to go back to camp or whatever, and I'll head to where they are. But here it's like, oh, they're running away. Everybody just go on the autopilot mode and wait until we reach the destination. So I've had a monster be very, very low and hit them like 7 times, and then they run to another location, and you hit them again, and then they run to their final location where they're meant to die in the final showdown. And it gets annoying when something like that happens, and I think that should be looked at. Along with the usual things, performance needs to be looked at. I'm sure balance, they're going to get a ton of information about weapon balance from this beta and see what stands out too much. It looks like they're continuing the path of just making every weapon better, which is the correct thing in my opinion. I hope they just buff or fix some of the weapons that I feel are lagging behind. The Kinsect speed is a really good example of that. That shouldn't be that way. Even the base level Kinsect should be 2 times faster than it currently is. That's my opinion, but that should be looked into. But overall, I am incredibly happy with what we are seeing here with the direction of the game, and I cannot wait for the full game. Monster Hunter is one of my favorite series of all time. I was going to be obsessed with this game no matter what. It's just that this direction has come as a surprise, a very positive one in my case, and I can't wait. However, I want to make a PSA in case this video gets views on something that I will probably repeat again closer to launch. I've made a full video with the proof of what I'm about to say that is linked in the description below. It's an older video, so expect it to be worse, I guess. But I am worried about how this game will launch and how people will receive it, because I am very aware that most of the people who really like Monster Hunter and are looking forward to this are people who come from World, who don't have previous experience with the series, who haven't played Rise and Sunbreak. And I know that a lot of the people who played World joined in later on, not at launch, even once Iceborne was out. And it's worth reminding people that Wilds is going to be the base vanilla release of what is a live service game. It doesn't have the G rank expansion. I think it's pretty safe to assume that the end game loop and grind won't be there on day one, or it'll be a much shorter version. Rise had the same situation happen. Sunbreak had the same situation where even upon its launch, it didn't have all of the grinding systems at the end of the game, but I very much know what I'm getting myself into, and while I'd like to be very wrong, there is a chance that Wilds releases with like 36 monsters, and that maybe a good amount of those are boring or useless, especially once you reach endgame. And I think some people are expecting the game to have 50, 60, or like a G rank expansion to have 70 plus 80 monsters and all of these in-depth systems and raids and stuff on launch day, and I don't think that's going to be the case. Again, I would love for this game to have 50, 60 monsters on launch day, because I just want more Monster Hunter, but I don't think that's going to be the case, and I hope people are more aware of that. And I think a lot of the newer player base that has joined with World and with Iceborne don't have those expectations properly in check. So this is just a PSA of don't be too surprised if Monster Hunter Wilds launches with endlessly repeatable content. You can spend 1,000 hours with what's there, but if we're talking about a playthrough to get the perfect gear set at the end, maybe it's just a 40 or 50 hour game. So just a reminder. Overall, fantastic stuff. I am incredibly excited for Wilds. I hope you are too. And if you enjoyed this and you want more from me in the world of gaming news, reviews, all sorts of other games, but also my content leading up to the launch of Wilds, for which I have quite a few plans, and my content of Wilds, remember to subscribe. That always helps, just as much as leaving a like on this video. I also want to give a huge thank you to my patrons up on the $1 patron wall, because they support everything I do here on the channel. I've been Mug. Thank you so much for watching. Go out there, enjoy some games, enjoy the beta while we have it. And as always, I'll see you again very soon.